Let's start off with Europe and Africa and the synergies that could come to the fore. We know that food security in Africa is very important, and we also know that Africa is a net importer of food. We're hoping that that scenario will change. Do you think that it can happen quick enough?
Well, we do hope so, because the opportunities are great in Africa. The African governments have become much more concerned about addressing the food security issues in Africa. They are committing more of their own resources. And fortunately also, the international donor community is responding likewise in making major commitments. From Aquila, I think we also $22.5 or so billion. The United States about $3.5 billion. Europe about $3.8 billion. The European Union minus the individual European states. So the conditions are really ripe for major investments in African agriculture. And given the low yields per hectare in Africa, any effort that can double the productivity per hectare will yield to phenomenal agricultural production.
We're talking about doubling yield, and any effort that is going to spur that is welcome. How exactly are we going to achieve it? Do you think it's about funding? Do you think it's about ensuring that the small to medium-sized farmers are being looked after adequately from a funding perspective? Is it access to clean water? What exactly is going to change the scenario in Africa?
Well, I can say all of the above, but we can start by having the African countries themselves organize their own programs in their countries, which reflect the needs and aspirations of the majority of their farmers, smallholder farmers, most of whom are women. So that we have plans which are really based on performance and results factors, rather than just general plans. And plans which are properly coordinated with bringing together all the different parts of the national administrations, and also working together with the international donor community. I think greater integration and collaboration is needed to build the synergy within the countries. And also there should be greater focus also to areas where there is greater potential. Because like we have come in AGRA to build on what we call the breadbasket approach, to be able to identify these areas and really put the package of resources that are required to boost production and to create linkages to markets. Because if we cannot create linkages to markets, then the efforts for production will also go to waste.
Vikas, let's touch on the inflationary environment that hit us in 2008, and we saw a food crisis ensuing. We saw, a lot of troubles happening in Mozambique recently. So a lot of concerns about food security. We saw floods coming through in various parts of the world, which of course elevated some prices of commodities. Looking at inflation right now and food inflation, it looks relatively tempered, but that could change very quickly.
Yes, we're starting to see the first inkling of excess demand for food worldwide, because one of the things that's happened with developing countries doing quite well, most of the new consumption of food, and especially high quality foods like meat, is taking place in the developing countries, and that's sucking in food from all over the world and starting to push up prices. So even though prices haven't run away, markets are very tight. So we do have the possibility of significant price or food inflation going forward.
Ulrich, from an economic perspective, and just looking at some of the numbers that have fed through, food inflation relatively down, but again that could change quite quickly. And it's also interesting to note that sub-Saharan Africa is experiencing higher food inflation than what East Africa is experiencing.
Yeah, if we look at the situation in 2008, when we had those record prices of wheat and maize and soybeans, the message that came into the world was, yes, we had too little investment in the agricultural sector, and secondly, we had this demand that Vikas is alluding to, that we see this strong demand coming out of the Far East, where we see strong growth rates. If we talk about investment, then I'm a little bit worried if I listen to the comments coming out of Nairobi, that if we look at Africa, we still sit with small holdings and women in charge of the farming community. Do we have the size of farms where we can really say that we can invest and we can be competitive against the sort of imports from the rest of Africa? And can we really utilize the opportunities within Africa if we only sit with small holdings?
Dr. Ngongi, let's touch on the fact that, you know, the Doha round of trade talks basically in its 9th year, a lot of incentives coming through for the developed world, and this is why some say the agricultural sector in Africa hasn't been able to flourish. What is your response to that?
Well, I would say that clearly the international trade has impacted upon African agriculture. There's no gainsaying that. But first of all, Africa, to be able to be a key player in all of these negotiations, have to have some things to be trade. If Africa is contributing 2% of global agricultural trade, I mean, clearly it's not a major player. So first of all, we should make maximum efforts to be able to have commodities that can be traded. And I'm sure if those efforts were made, we can change the scales. If I just can touch on the issue of smallholder and large, medium, clearly the potential for increased production amongst the smallholders is enormous. There are smallholder farmers who are producing up to 6 kilograms, 6 metric tons of maize or rice per hectare. So it is not just a matter of scale. If the technologies can get to the hands of smallholder farmers, they can produce those surpluses which can give Africa a trading margin, can increase Africa's share of negotiations and the trade negotiations. So if it's not possible to trade, then we will always be able to, we will always be under the conditions of negotiating out of weakness.
Dr. Ngongi, what is your view on genetically modified foods? Many say that this is going to be the saving grace for Africa. Some are very averse to it. We know that Europe in particular will not import any genetically modified foods, and we also know various African countries have been relatively reluctant to allow any kind of donor aid or donor food that is genetically modified.
Well, I think the issue of GMOs, I think, has become a little bit exaggerated and has become a little bit emotional also. There is no silver bullet to African agriculture, and I don't think GM crops are the silver bullet. They may have their role to play in other regions of the world. But here in Africa, where you do not have the improved seeds, which are conventionally bred, are not getting to the hands of smallholder farmers or any farmer, let me say. There are very few farmers in Africa. Only 36% use any share of improved seed in Africa. So if we can increase the share of farmers using improved seeds that exist today on the continent, really there will be dramatic changes in the face of African agriculture. I don't think we have to wait until the day of GM for African agriculture to change. If the seeds today are not able to get into the hands of farmers, how would the GM seeds be able to get to the hands of farmers? So we have to create delivery systems that bring technologies into the hands of farmers, whether they're small or large. So really the issue is not GM, the issue is delivery systems that bring technologies to the doorsteps of farmers.
Dr. Ngongi, just touching on how much money needs to be invested in Africa on a yearly basis going forward so that we do change the scenario, could you please paint a picture for us very quickly?
Well, the African countries' heads of state met in Maputo in 2003 and agreed to invest 10% or at least of their own national budgets in agriculture. Well, to try to quantify it is not really the issue. The IFPRI, the International Institute for Center for Policy Research, had calculated that Africa needed about $39 billion of investments per year. If the African governments met their own 10% commitment from their own budgets, they will cover at least 20 billion of the 39 billion. So that's already would be a major contribution. Clearly, countries have made an effort. 7 or 10 countries have crossed the 10% line. Today, some 22 countries have signed the CAADP Compact. 18 countries are already making 5.5% overall economic growth in their countries. Clearly, the momentum is there, and any smartly invested money, resources in agriculture will yield huge dividends. I think the opportunities are enormous. And I think most African countries are committed to it, but the donor community, particularly Europe, for which this Montpellier report is addressed, are really invited to participate in this open opportunity for ending food insecurity in Africa.